Icebergs. You guys loved the last one I did on Hotline Miami, so I thought why not show some love to Katana Zero, another indie game I'm insanely fascinated with. As the drill goes, icebergs are a type of meme that share knowledge on a specific subject, and as we go deeper down the iceberg, the entries become more unknown and confusing. None of what I say is set in stone. These are ultimately my interpretations of these entries. Your point of view might be completely different, and that's fine. Also, I just want to geek over this iceberg real quick. It says on the bottom right corner, made by Cybo. Dude, dudette, whatever you may be, this is a beautifully made iceberg. Like deadass, look at how polished this thing is. It has different text colors for different types of entries, and the different tiers are based off the locations in the game. It has a nice blend of theories, development facts, and lore. Shit, dude, it just looks awesome, and I mean that. This goes without saying, but for real, please go play Katana Zero. It's a very good game with a very good story, good music, and the community is just awesome down there. And also, we'll be spoiling the life out of this game, so I really don't want to ruin it for you. Plus, I expect you to have some background in the story so these entries make sense. This video will be waiting for you when you come back. A link to the Steam page will be in the description below. For those who are staying, I highly appreciate all the support you guys showed last time on the Hotline Miami Iceberg. I'll link it somewhere if you haven't seen it, but all the comments and whatnot really made my day, so thank you. Also, I'll be responding to every comment, and I mean every comment, so say something and you'll see me there. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Katana Zero Iceberg. The Rooftop. Kronos. Kronos is a drug in Katana Zero that was administered to the Null soldiers in the Cro-Mag War. The Kronos drug gets its name from the early Greek philosophy personification of time, also known as Kronos. Now, Kronos is actually a pretty big plot device. It's essentially what gives us that slow down time ability in the game. There is debate to what actually is the ability. Is it us messing with time? Is it us receiving precognition and hypercognition? One player had an interesting theory on it. He argued that Kronos could be based off of the natural fight or flight reaction, but increasing its effects tenfold, as to make it seem like the user is a psychic or savant. Speedrun mode. After beating the game, you unlock speedrun mode. As the name implies, this is a game mode where you can speedrun the entire game, or a single level, on normal, hard, with any weapon of your choice from the lab, with a randomized seed or a set one. This game mode can be extremely fun for those who want a bit more content. You haven't lived until you beat the entire game without using Kronos. That's when the game hits different. Psychiatrist Final Boss. So after you beat the final level, Zero, the one we know and love, takes a trip down to the psychiatrist's office. Throughout the game, Zero will interact with the psychiatrist and will have these quote-unquote therapy sessions with him, plus short conversations over the phone. In most playthroughs, at the end, Zero will beat the psychiatrist to death, fed up with his bullshit therapy. However, if you spent the entire game being a rude asshole to the psychiatrist, then instead of being killed, he'll transform into this eldritch horror. The free DLC. After the game's huge success, ASCIIsoft, the developer and brains behind Katana Zero, announced that a DLC for the game would be in the works, and due to the amazing success of KZ, he'll be making it completely free. I skimmed through the iceberg and it looks like bits of information about the DLC are spread out throughout the iceberg, so I won't say much now. Let's move on. The Dragon 15. Gaminol 15, dubbed the Dragon by the media, is the only playable character other than Zero, albeit for one level, and is an integral character to the story. He serves as a deuteragonist, meaning he's right behind Zero when it comes to the character importance. And similarly to our protagonist Zero, it is assumed due to his gamma status that 15 was put on Kronos as a child, and raised to be a weapon of destruction. A super soldier, if you will. Throughout the game, 15 is set on hunting down and destroying the powers that be who created the Null soldiers, and ultimately, Kronos. The best comparison I can give you is The Story of the Crow, which is a great book and movie by the way, where Eric Draven comes back after a year to hunt down the individuals that wronged him. At least that's the connection that I make. He's a character whose sole purpose has now become revenge. Replays after completing a room. After the player dispatches everyone in a room, the game will show a replay of your gameplay through the lens of a CCTV footage screen. The footage being in black and white, real time, no slow-mo. Some like to argue that this is literally the CCTV footage of where Zero is at, and showing you, the player, the plan you planned out, being executed. Devolver Digital. Devolver Digital is the home of many indie bangers. One small series some of you might know, Hotline Miami, is one of them. After Hotline Miami sort of put Devolver Digital on the map, some years later they would pick up Katana Zero and publish that joint as well. Devolver would in fact pick up KZ after a mystery developer dropped the game initially. "We know who it is, I'm just trying to spice the later entries up." ASCIIsoft. ASCIIsoft, real name Justin Stander, is the developer of Katana Zero, and other titles that I need to get to, such as Overpowered, Tower of Heaven, and Pause Ahead. While some may think that Justin is lacking in quantity under his developer belt, he certainly makes up for it with the quality of his products. Hotline Miami inspiration. Hotline Miami is one of the many messiahs of the indie scene, being an indie success story, and overall, inspiring a lot of games that came after it. Katana Zero is one of them. Stander argues that he only played the game once many years ago, and can't even remember anything from it, but admits that perhaps on some subconscious level, it might have ultimately affected his work on Katana Zero. If you've played both games, you can tell that they're both made on this one hit, one kill type of blueprint. You can kill most enemies with one hit, but so can they. This style comes together to make a fast-paced, balls-to-the-wall type game. Government Lab. The Government Lab is an area that becomes accessible only when you beat the game. Then to unlock the lab, you have to grab the new mecha keycard from the psychiatrist's newly made corpse. In this lab, you're able to switch the base katana to other swords, but you must unlock the swords first. Every sword has its own respective key, and those keys are spread out throughout the game. For example, the prism key for the prism sword is on this guy in the very first level. Meanwhile, the master key is on Josh Rose. There's also a locked door in the government lab that people speculate might be the way to access the DLC, whenever that comes out. The dragon is not Zero. So whenever you'd finish a level and return to your cozy apartment, you always get these news flashes that give you a recap of your work and tie into the overall world and lore building. You'll walk into your apartment and the TV will go off, saying something like, "Welcome to 6 o'clock news, the dragon dismembered 15 people and then played basketball with their heads." In fact, this is a proper plot point that's mentioned over and over again. The dragon this, the dragon that. You as a player sort of just go along with it because you're made to believe that the dragon is referring to you, Zero, but it isn't. The dragon actually happens to be another Null, by the name of 15. He happens to also be a Chronos junkie with a neat sword. Zero was in the war. Throughout the game, Zero is plagued by these unexplained nightmares. He often talks to the psychiatrist about them, but to no real avail. As the game progresses, the dream becomes more and more clearer, details being added as time goes on. Initially you're meant to think that this boy is Zero, and that perhaps this attack has something to do with his memory loss and shrouded past. I love this plot twist. It reveals the frightening, harsh soldier that marches towards the child to be Zero. Zero turns out to be the soldier in the Chromag War, serving new mecha as part of the Null unit. As always, bits and bobs of information are spread out throughout the Iceberg, so more on this stuff later. The girl is not real. Make some noise, ladies and gentlemen, we have our first theory of the day. I want to start off by saying this must be like the #1 theory of all time in the KZ community. Even if you're not someone that's crazy deep into the lore, I'm sure you've gotten wind of this theory before. The theory implies that the little girl we see with Zero is in fact not real, and a complete hallucination. There's some reasons for this. First and foremost, we have to discuss where Zero lives. Without going into too much detail, because I'm sure it'll pop up sooner or later on the Iceberg, Zero lives in the 3rd district. The 3rd district is just a bad area. Call it the hood, call it the ghetto, it's just not a fun place to be in. In fact, so bad that children are straight up not allowed to be there. This also doesn't help the fact that the little girl is never seen interacting with anyone besides Zero. And then on top of that, she is seen with the 2 masked men, Comedy and Tragedy, whose own reality is highly debated amongst fans. Hard mode. Hard mode, as we briefly mentioned earlier during the speedrun entry, is unlocked after you beat the game, and simply is the harder difficulty of the game. More enemies, stronger enemies, less items, more traps. It's just another way to run through the game again for the 87th time. New Mecha. New Mecha is where the game takes place. Now honestly, we don't know shit about this place. Some people speculate that this could be the Mecha, perhaps in the future, but I like the way one player put it. He gave the example of how New York is nothing like York, yet has its namesake. New Mecha could be under a similar influence, perhaps paying homage to Mecha, or having some connection to the land, but as time has passed, New Mecha has become its own thing. I'm more personally inclined to believe the New York City theory, because we don't see any Islamic influence in New Mecha, or in fact, any religious influence at all. One could argue that's due to the fact that the game takes place in the most degenerate part of the city, but one thing to note is that we do see a church a few times. Comedy and Tragedy. The masked men, better known as Comedy and Tragedy, are a mystery to say the least. They randomly appear throughout the game, speaking to our protagonist Zero about the ultimate decision he will have to make. In fact, their existence is highly debated upon. Are they even real? Or are they just hallucinations? Currently, we ain't got a clue. See, I don't know about you, but a part of me wants to go through with the theory of, oh, they're just manifestations of Zero's personality, oh, they're hallucinations. But another part of me thinks that trope is so overused at this point, meaning, do we just have to chalk it up to, yeah, the protagonist just sees shit? But who knows, only time will tell. The Null Project. The Null Project was a secret operation done by the new mecha government to produce these super soldiers with precognition, making them deadly adversaries against the Cro-Mag opposition. The Null soldiers were divided into categories from what we know: Alpha, Beta, and Gamma. Beta being the weakest type of Null, and Gamma being the cream of the crop. It has been said that Null soldiers were hand-picked due to their lack of emotion during violent acts. In other words, psychopathy, with the Gamma tier specifically having their nulls being put on Kronos as early as childhood. I just love the mystery surrounding this whole concept inside the universe itself. There's a scene in the game that shows veterans of the Cro-Mag War discussing the Null unit in the bar. They talk about how the Nulls were almost damn near psychic, as if they could read their minds. This goes to show the overall confusion and lack of understanding that is seen in the world for the Null soldiers. What they were, who they were. No one really seems to know. It's also very interesting to note that the vets inside the bar look well into their senior years, gray hair and all. However, Nulls like 0 and 15 don't look any older than 30 max. Would that then make them child soldiers, or would that mean that the Kronos had some effect on their users aging? Food for thought. 3rd District. The 3rd District of New Mecha, as previously stated, is where the game takes place. This district is the bottom of the barrel, only harboring poor veterans and junkies. The narrative of Katana Zero often mirrors real-life sentiments, the Cro-Mag War taking on a very strong inspiration from the Vietnam War. In the same nature, I like to believe that the 3rd District is meant to mirror the American government's lack of care for veterans post quote-unquote usefulness. The Apartment. The Dragon Mod. The Dragon Mod, created by Prometheus, is a mod that allows players to play as the dragon throughout the entire game, as opposed to the one dragon tape that he's in. This mod started development in what seems to be June of 2019, and finished around December of the same year, just before Christmas. The mod first and foremost makes 15 a playable character now, and on top of that, he has his own animations, alter rooms, and his own story. I mean, look at this animation. You can't tell me this shit isn't funny. Killing Josh Rose before he jumps. When playing the 2nd level, one usually approaches Josh Rose, has a dope conversation with him, and then he proceeds to leap of faith off the building. However, if you're quick enough, you can grab the statue, or any item in fact, and rocket punch it to him, killing him before he does. On Josh's body, you can find the Master Key, which will give you the Master Sword in the government lab. Doing so will unlock an achievement. Another one that can be unlocked is if you jump off the balcony instead. Kronos Withdrawal. As the name implies, when users of Kronos stop using it, they experience harsh and extreme Kronos withdrawal symptoms. These symptoms include hallucinations, and time coming to an eerie standstill. In fact, if someone dies in a state of Kronos withdrawal, they are left replaying their death over and over again. Evidence for this being, when V starts torturing the neighbor, he injects him with Kronos to slow down everything. Kronos withdrawal is exactly that. Time slowing down, and the user getting trapped in this sort of false eternity. I'd also like to add on, possibly, another symptom might even be the nightmares we see from Zero, but I can't say for sure. The other combat drugs will be used in the DLC. A lot of people speculate that if something like Kronos exists in the world of Katana Zero, something so out there and destructive, then surely New Mecha must have developed other combat drugs alongside Kronos. Hence, maybe, just maybe, we might see other wartime secrets exposed in the DLC. Ludowick. Ludowick is a musical artist from the Netherlands, renowned for his unique style of blending analog and modern equipment when brewing his tracks. He's responsible for the game's unique soundtrack, alongside Bill Kiley and Stander himself, but more specifically, bangers such as Overdose, Full Confession, and my personal favorite, 3rd District. Stealth. The prison is a short level in Katana Zero, in which the player comes to find the aftermath of 15's work. Now most players are in and out with this one. However, this unique level does in fact employ stealth mechanics. Now one may ask, can Zero cut up everyone like he usually does? And the answer to that is, who do you think you're talking about? He's Zero, of course he can. However, if you took the medicine, instead of refusing it, then you must complete the entire level without killing anyone, meaning by extension, not being seen. This is one of the ways to unlock the prototype key, 6 times larger than planned. The DLC has been in development for a long time. A long time. Please, Justin, please just release the damn DLC already. Please, my kids haven't been able to eat Whoa. I don't know who he is and how he got up here. Go back to the basement. Anyways, what was I saying? Oh yeah, the DLC. The DLC just keeps getting bigger and bigger. As the title implies, Stander has been quoted saying that the DLC is now 6 times larger than planned. In other words, almost half of the original game. Meaning we're gonna get a shit ton of content, fingers crossed. New weapons, From what we've seen, at the very least, some of the KZ DLC will take place in the new Mecha Labs. We learned from Standard's development update posts that Zero will have 2 brand new weapons. One is going to be this plasma blaster, and the other will be a gravity warping robo arm. So far, it looks good. Now, I'd like to preface, as far as I know, these weapons are weapons as in bombs or glass bottles, not weapons as in his swords. Chinatown arcade cabinets. In the Chinatown level, there's an arcade section of the level that shoutouts a few other indie titles. We see 3, Shovel Knight, Doug Game, and Rivals of Aether. For a second I was convinced that this was a reference to Hollow Knight. It's really late and I have a mountain of work ahead, but one can imagine Sisyphus happy. Perhaps this was my subconscious longing for Silksong. Oh, and if you're one of those people that refers to Silksong as Skong, kindly leave and never return. Robot binary translation. In the level 3rd district, we encounter a robot that quite frankly yaps a lot. However, for one of his lines, he'll blurt out a line of binary code, and when you decipher what this code means, it reads out to, sorry, no Easter eggs. Hey, we all love a good sense of humor. Strong Terry. First and foremost, I'd like to start off with a moment of silence for this respected individual. Strong Terry. Where do you even begin to summarize a man like that? Now, but on a serious note, Strong Terry is an enemy that's seen during the club mission, and he's just loved in game by everyone. The second you kill him, a dude comes running down and distraught, terrified, screaming, "You killed Strong Terry?" The guy just inspires a lot of people around him, and that's what matters, pushing the ones around you to be better people. With that being said, he's become meme real estate in the Katana Zero community, the Inhuman One. From what I was able to find and learn, the Inhuman One is essentially the Sasquatch gaming of Katana Zero. He has informative and entertaining videos on KZ that also tend to be lore-filled or explanations of the game's narratives and characters. Temporary Australian Switch ban. Katana Zero was set to release in the Australia/New Zealand part of the world on April 18th, 2019. Except it didn't. If you've been in the gaming scene for a minute, especially back in the day, you would have heard how anal Australia is when it comes to their media, especially video games. In fact, Australia only got R ratings for games about 11 years ago, back in 2013. With this prior knowledge, now it isn't that surprising why or how KZ got banned. It also doesn't help the fact that Australia has these super specific, yet at the same time super vague laws when it comes to how drugs are portrayed in video games. For example, if your game has someone taking meth as a healing item, that's a big no-no. I guess because of those laws, they chalked up Chronos to be showing kids how awesome and rad drugs are. Karate Rickies. As I had said earlier, hard mode spices things up, and one of those spices is a new enemy variant. In the normal difficulty, we encounter Skinny Ricks, a somewhat fast enemy type that has melee attacks. In hard mode, we encounter a new version called Karate Rickies. These enemies are very difficult to roll under, and now they don these kick-ass red bandanas and button-downs. The Bar. V's Russian swearing. V just swears a lot in Russian. Snow is the little girl. Some fans theorize that the little girl that is seen with Zero could possibly be a kid version of Snow. Before we explain this entry, let us clarify briefly who Snow is. Snow is one of the minor antagonists, alongside Mr. Kissyface and of course V. She also carries a katana and has this dope song whenever she shows up, and that's all we know about her for now. She's pretty much in the shadows in the main game. With that being said, some people speculate that the little girl could possibly be a long-lost sister of Zero. However, my personal theory is that Snow was another Gamma Null, just like Zero, just like 15. If you remember, Gamma Nulls, being the strongest of the Null, were put on Chronos from a very young age. If the little girl could possibly be someone that Zero knew, paired with the theory that she's just an hallucination, what if the little girl was Snow, whilst her and Zero were being put on Chronos? V is on Chronos. People like to throw this one around, but nah, I don't see it. I believe a lot of fans see V as no stranger to drugs. He uses and he uses hard, yet this doesn't mean that he's necessarily on Chronos. Has V augmented his body? Perhaps. Is V on some other combat drugs other than Chronos? It's possible. Yet, V is not stupid. He in fact uses Chronos as a weapon against people. He, if anyone, would know the cons and the drawbacks of using Chronos, of using a ticking time bomb for a temporary power boost. I mean, Chronos is literally the guy's go-to torture tool. Death ending. The choice we referred to back when we were talking about comedy and tragedy was a choice of life or death that the player has to make. Comedy and tragedy give Zero the ultimatum of either picking the golden mask of life or the silver mask of death. I'll be honest, I'm not sure if this entry is referring to the actual death of Zero or the silver mask of death, so I'll just cover both. The reality is actually switched, meaning the golden mask of life isn't life for you, it's life for the cops, and in general the people you won't be able to slay if you die right here and now. The silver mask of death isn't death for you, but it's death for the cops, and the people soon to meet your blade. It's a cool play on words if you'd like. The Zero dying ending is definitely not canon. It's more of a what if type thing, especially because you miss out on a whole portion of the game, and the ultimate reveal of Zero being the soldier in the nightmare. iDubbbz and credits. iDubbbz is credited in the credits. This is due to the fact that Stander and iDubbbz are friends in real life, even developing a new game called Pocket Squirrel alongside each other. Either this was just a homage to a good friend, or maybe iDubbbz even backed up Katana Zero in ways we don't know. Interrupting Leon. In the Slaughterhouse mission, Leon communicates to Zero through these recordings on a TV. They're generally just him rambling on about nulls and, "Ah yes, you're such a good lab experiment for my nefarious science needs." You can, however, cut his speeches short by slicing the exposed wires that control the screens. In fact, usually, when one plays through the level, there will be like this sniper thing that constantly tracks the player, adding to the sense of challenge on top of the already usual enemies and other factors. If you interrupt Leon, you can shit on that entire mechanic and make the level far easier for yourself. Also, since we're here already, I might as well add that you can also roll past the cameras, causing them not to pick up on your presence, which will in turn make the Savant key, tucked away in the corner, available to you. Pocket Squirrel. Pocket Squirrel, as mentioned a few minutes ago, is the new project Standers, alongside friend iDubbbz, is working on. PS is a mobile game about catching and raising squirrels. I'm sure with the individuals working on it, it'll be a great game with an interesting premise. However, I do want to put this out there, since it is related to the topic, has expressed some dissatisfaction in relation to Pocket Squirrel. This is due to the fact that the DLC is also simultaneously being worked on, which was announced about 5 years ago, has left fans waiting and waiting. Imagine if Team Cherry announced the development of a mobile game alongside their already overdue product. That's the situation some members of the community find themselves in. However, ASCIIsoft did recently tweet out a small teaser in relation to the DLC, yet there is still no definitive release date. Comedy and tragedy hidden in hotel and studio. Comedy and tragedy are hidden and teased in earlier levels before their actual debut. It's one of those things you can only really pick up on or understand on a replay. In the hotel level, tragedy can be seen reading a newspaper, keeping tabs on Zero. As for comedy, he can be seen very briefly in the director's chair after the V boss fight in the studio level. The war is based off Vietnam. Anyone who has a passion for historical wars, or just general knowledge of the Vietnam War, will see the striking similarities the Cro-Mag War has in comparison to its real-life counterpart. For example, the two old veterans in the bar that talk about how they could have won the war, if not for the hippies, symbolizing the public's disapproval of the war, which again was a very real thing with the Americans in Vietnam. Fortunate Son isn't just a song, it's a mirror into how the people felt at the time for fighting a war that wasn't theirs to begin with. Other comparisons being a much more developed nation ultimately losing to the inferior ragtag warriors, the child killings, the villages being burnt down, and last but not least, the stronger country developing and using these very war-specific tricks up their sleeves. In Katana Zero, that trick of course being Kronos, and in Vietnam, Agent Orange. Both affect veterans of each respective war in their own ways. No PS4/PS5 port. I don't think it's news to say that Sony, despite their great exclusives, isn't a platform for indies. In fact, the only way you can see an indie on the PlayStation Store is if it did amazing sales. Some examples being Undertale and Hotline Miami, which makes the lack of a Katana Zero port on PlayStation consoles even stranger. The game sold 500,000 copies in under a year, which apparently generated $5 million in revenue. Someone can fact check me on that, that's just the information I got. Which is insane when you realize that this was just another indie game in terms of development, funding and whatnot. I saw some reports saying Devolver Digital had hinted at or teased a PlayStation release, but as of 2024, nothing has happened yet. Game Maker Studio 2. Game Maker Studio has been the developer toolset for a lot of certified bangers. Spelunky, Hotline Miami, Undertale, Nuclear Throne, to name a few. This entry is in reference to the fact that KZ started off and was developed on Game Maker Studio 1, but was ultimately ported to the more fresher model of Game Maker Studio 2. Dodging the cameras in the Slaughterhouse. So it turns out I inadvertently covered this with the Interrupting Leon entry. Just to reiterate, see these thingies? You don't have to interact with them. If you can pull off these frame-perfect rolls, then random bombs and whatnot won't go off, paired with cutting off Leon's first message thing. The Church. Unused torture animations. V tortures Zero's loud neighbors because he's weird. In the game, the scene ends right as V starts to mutilate the guy's finger. However, the scene was actually much longer and more graphic, and was in fact fully animated. I'm not quite sure why it was shortened. Perhaps the longer scene felt ultimately out of place. Jumping off the railing. Another one we covered somewhat by accident in the earlier tiers. Nonetheless, in the hotel level, when you encounter Josh Rose, you can actually kill him before he jumps off the railing. If you do so, you can pick up the master key off of his body. After you've done that, proceed to slide and jump crash style off the building, and you should unlock a sweet achievement. Prison Terry. There was an unused enemy from Katana Zero. As the entry's name implies, it was simply a strong Terry with a prison outfit. 15 sent Zero to the Slaughterhouse. Alright, I'm gonna take you on a beautiful journey. I'm gonna take you on a story time. Ready for this? Before every mission, Zero meets up with his psychiatrist, his handler being a more fitting title. In these meetings, Zero is given the illusion of being heard, but the psychiatrist pays little to none attention. After having a short one-sided exchange, the psychiatrist would then inject Zero with Kronos and send him on his merry way, instructing him to pick up the dossier on his way out, which would then have information on the next target. What I just described to you is the usual routine of the game before a level. However, before the Slaughterhouse mission, things go very differently. We see Zero walk into the psychiatrist's office, but is strangely locked. As he turns around, he gets a call from a stranger, someone he doesn't know. The individual on the other end of the line tells Zero of a man named Leon von Elvensleben and where he's located. Their district, Slaughterhouse and meat processing. The man never reveals his identity, paired with the fact that this wasn't an order from the new mecha government, seeing as a psychiatrist, post-Slaughterhouse mission, is just as shocked when he realizes you know of Leon's existence. The pieces of the puzzle all start to come together when you learn that Leon was the mastermind behind Kronos and the Null Soldiers. He is one of the many individuals that were the driving factor behind 0 and 15. This entry implies that the one that informed 0 about Leon was in fact 5th the Dragon Teen. Think about it. 15 was on a mission to have the Kronos Originator Squad be wiped out, the people responsible for making him a tool of war. Perhaps the heat was too high. I mean, this was shortly after a literal highway chase where a fucking helicopter blew up. It would only make sense to send another person of somewhat equal prowess to do the job. Room_government_O_old. Not gonna lie, I have no clue what this entry was referring to. Maybe the door in the government lab that is currently inaccessible. Lies from the future, guys. I found out what it is. Alright, so, the government lab was meant to be in the base game, with this room in it. However, the level, due to the game being behind schedule, was ultimately just pushed into the DLC. Scientist Enemy. In the DLC gameplay footage ASCIIsoft released a while back, we can see a gunman enemy type, but they look much different. They essentially look like if Einstein started carrying a piece on him, with their bullets being undeflectable. 15 interrogated V. After you successfully bring down the heli V's in, 15 shows up out of nowhere and takes V into the Shadow Realm with him. After this point, V is never seen again. Once you beat the game and the credits roll, we see V in the corner of 15's hideout, either bleeding out or possibly already dead, tortured and presumably interrogated. V is the 5th Null Soldier. V is a mysterious character to say the least. At first glance, he's nothing more than a meathead thug working for some organization. But when you start to analyze him, you start to realize that there's more to his character than what meets the eye. For example, after the highway helicopter fight, V proclaims to us that he's killed 6 Null before us, and they were nothing new to him. One could argue that this was a show of bravado from a very vulnerable V. But it isn't impossible. Whenever we interact with V in terms of gameplay, V is always seen holding his ground fairly well, implying that V is no stranger to fighting people like Zero. Null like Zero. I also think one thing to note is V's encompassing knowledge of the actual Kronos drug. Remember that point I made way back in the earlier tiers about how there was this sense of confusion amongst the people on what Kronos actually is, and how I refer to the scene of the veterans in the bar? Yeah, V doesn't suffer from that at all. In fact, the only people that can talk about Kronos the way he does are people who A, made the damn thing, or B, are users of it. With all this being said, I'm sure you can piece out where this is heading, but this theory suggests that V might be the possible 5th Null Soldier, V being the literal Roman numeral for the number 5, paired with his combat prowess against other Null Soldiers and his extensive knowledge of Kronos. Safe to say, this one isn't too far-fetched. Drones are not required to complete a room. This entry is referring to the Chinatown level, in which we see for the first and last time a drone enemy type. These are literal drones that track and shoot at you. With that being said, you don't have to actually destroy the drones to complete the room, refusing Kronos in prison. If you go against the direct orders of the psychiatrist and talk to DJ Radiohead, after some trolling you can choose not to take Kronos. If you don't take the Kronos, the mission will be slightly altered. Instead of the usual dossier from the psychiatrist, we'll have one from the masked men, and by extension, the means of getting the prototype key are actually changed. Normally, the method of getting the prototype is to go complete stealth, and not to kill anyone. However, if one refuses taking Kronos, then the requirement evolves into taking out everyone. And the headhunter is the psychiatrist's daughter. After the bunker level, the psychiatrist is seen panicking over the fact that he can't reach his daughter. Fans started theorizing that the daughter might have been the headhunter, the individual we just killed before meeting him. It's a cool what if, but it easily breaks down when you start to analyze if it could actually work or not. The blue liquid tanks are an attempt to create null soldiers. In the bunker level, we see these tanks filled with the blue liquid carrying bodies. This entry implies that those tanks are actually a re-attempt at the Null project, post-Cro-Mag War. The Slaughterhouse. Development time. The making of a product is interesting, because we as the player or viewer just see the finished product. We don't get to see the blood, sweat, and tears that are put into the project. Despite being a fairly short game, Katana Zero was in fact in development for years before its eventual release. According to Standard, the game was in development for a solid 6 years, starting back in 2013 and then having been released in 2019. Unused multiplayer. Super early into development, KZ was meant to have this versus multiplayer mode, in which players would fight each other in this almost Smash-like fighting game mode. In hindsight, this was ultimately cut from the game, possibly due to focusing on pushing out the main game itself, rather than focusing on side content. Suda51 is a fan of Katana Zero. Suda51 is an OG developer in the Japanese gaming scene, being the mind behind Killer 7, Lollipop Chainsaw, and last but not least, No More Heroes. Suda's games often deal with dark themes and humor, and are overall quite batshit insane. I could be wrong, but I always had a feeling that Studio 51 was a little nod to Suda 51. A few years back, Suda tweeted a screenshot of KZ, the part where Zero and V have an exchange outside of Studio 51, with the hashtags Switch at Home. Kronos affects aging. As the name implies, users of Kronos seem to have their aging altered because of Kronos. For example, it's really damn strange when we see other veterans of the Cro-Mag War, well into their retirement years, seen having complete gray hair, and just generally being very old. Meanwhile, the Null soldiers, who served in the same war, look the exact same. They haven't aged a day. 0, 15, all look young and youthful. Because of this, fans have started theorizing that Kronos also impacts the aging of its users, causing them to either age extremely slowly or having their aging paused completely. Juncture. Juncture is a big company in the world of Katana Zero, yet we don't know much about them. You see, the Juncture name is seen all over the world of Katana Zero, from inside levels to on everyday items. Some fans speculate that this could be the company Snow and V are working for. Heave Ho crossover. Heave Ho is a platformer published by Devolver Digital, made by French studio Le Cartel, and has had multiple crossover characters from other Devolver games, one biker and one Zero. The Labs. Voice acting. Voice acting was something that ASCIIsoft had genuinely considered for Katana Zero in the earlier development years. In fact, I was able to find this small snippet of some voice acting, courtesy of Rowan Nihilus.
I'd do it myself, but the old gout is flaring up.
Now, not gonna lie, I'm not sure if this line specifically ever made it to the actual game, because I can't remember reading that anywhere, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I also think it's kind of funny that a year before the eventual release, Standard posted a Twitter poll asking the community whether he should include voice acting, with the options of yes, no, and just finish the game. All in all, it worked out in the end. Not every game needs to have this top level voice acting. In fact, I'd argue that the little beeps and boops give more character to the game, in a similar fashion to, let's say, Undertale. Oh, and as of me making this Iceberg, some fans of the game got together and actually made this dope fan dub. I think it's awesome and they did an amazing job, so I'll be linking that down in the description. Adult Swim Games was originally the publisher. Adult Swim Games was the original publisher for Katana Zero, yet for reasons unknown, they amicably parted ways, according to ASCIIsoft. It's never been said outright, but some speculate that ASG had to drop the game due to the game being delayed back to back, with the original intended release date being 2016 and the actual release date we got being 2019.
And then where are you at in development, and when's it coming out?
I would say probably another year of development. Very late 2016, early 2017.
Bigger gaming companies are always known to incentivize profit rather than what-ifs, but ultimately it was their loss. As we know, Devolver Digital took over, and the rest is history. Headhunter and Snow redesigns. Any game or project goes through a few developmental cycles. Some things change slightly, some greatly, and some get cut out altogether. Katana Zero is no different. The characters of Snow and Headhunter went through a couple of redesigns of their own. Headhunter, for example, as we find in the Katana Zero concept art blog, and I quote, "The Headhunter outfit and equipment were meant to represent the Null program as a whole. She received the most numerous and wildly different designs by far." End quote. This is evident from the concept art shown here. We have a variety of outfits and ideas for what the Headhunter could have been. I don't know about you, but as described, I see a clash and blend of different themes, a cyberpunk mix with a hardcore soldier. As for Snow, we now know her as a simple swordswoman with a kimono and a blade. However, her concept art tells a very different story. In the concept art, Snow is seen having vastly different hair, and even futuristic elements such as a red visor and a venom snake-ass bionic arm. The redesigns for Headhunter can be accredited to having multiple themes, alongside trying to personify and symbolize a huge project, such as the Null Soldier. Meanwhile, Snow's redesigns can be chalked up to different artistic interpretations. Tightrope Launcher. To add on to the bandwagon of cut content, we were supposed to originally have this sort of tightrope launcher thing that could help us traverse over gaps and throughout the levels generally speaking. However, it was ultimately cut due to the lack of its practical use in the real game. Holy shit. Wow, finally, it's been completed, guys. Ladies and gents, the Katana Zero Iceberg is finally finished. Holy shit, man. This is probably my biggest project yet. This video, I feel like it took less time compared to the Hotline Miami Iceberg, but it definitely felt like more work in terms of editing and honestly just like overall research. Because the Hotline Miami Iceberg, I feel like I actually knew most of the things, but the Katana Zero Iceberg, I definitely found myself, searching things up and trying to research, especially for the cut content, man. That shit was definitely hard to learn. But yeah, man, if you made it to this part of the video, to the end of the video, then I really appreciate it. I thank you sincerely. There was times where I was like, damn, this shit is kind of getting boring, man. Like, this video is fun to make, but sometimes you kind of lose the end goal, when you're like sitting for hours on end editing, making a script, etc. But then I get reminded of all the support and love that you guys showed on the last video, and it really pushes me to continue with the work and stuff. So yeah, thank you, and hell yeah, man, I just hope you enjoyed.